So good morning, everybody. I'm so looking forward to our class today. Let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we'll get right into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bochar banu mikol ha'amim, natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So let me just kind of sum up where we've been and where we are at the moment. Shavuot is in 2 weeks. And in celebration of Shavuot and receiving the Torah at Sinai, I was inviting us to think about, receiving Torah is a very passive word. We receive Torah, but to what extent are we allowed to bring our own mind, our own conscience, our own core, our own values to the Torah that we receive? And what do we do when we encounter passages that reflect a morality that we may not share? And what we talked about, if you weren't here last week, just by way of quick review, we had seen in the famous story of a political dispute between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. There was the case of a man who comes and says, I'm an Ammonite, but I would love to become part of the Jewish community. I want to marry a Jew. I want to have a nice Jewish family. And there's a verse from Deuteronomy that says that can never happen. And Rabban Gamliel says, can everyone get put on mute? Or Joan, if you can please mute everybody. So there's a verse from Deuteronomy that says that cannot happen. And so Rabban Gamliel says, my hands are tied. And then we saw Rabbi Yehoshua, his antagonist, who says, no, Judah the Ammonite, we're happy to have you join the Jewish people. We're happy to have you marry a Jewish woman. We're happy to have you raise a Jewish family. But what about the verse that says no Ammonites? He says, well, who knows what an Ammonite is today anyway? Today, an Ammonite is different from biblical time. In other words, Rabbi Judah reads the verse like a pretzel to say that the verse is still good law, but we don't know what an Ammonite is. So we're going to basically, he keeps the verse in the Torah, but just finds a way around it. And so he has a moral core, but he does not give explicit voice to that moral core. And that was what we saw last week. And what I wanted to do today, which is kind of our last session on this topic, is take a look at the Torah's single hardest passage. I mean, it's just such an obviously challenging passage that the rabbis themselves have a problem, and a very big problem with it. It's called Bein Sorer U'Moreh, the case of the child who is wayward and defiant. And you'll see in Deuteronomy that the parents are going to take this child to the town square and incite the elders to stone him to death. So you have parents responsible for stoning to death their own son. So what could be more horrible than that? And you'll see that in the Talmud, one rabbi channels the voice of Rabbi Yehoshua, which is, we'll keep it on the books, but we're going to interpret it out of existence. And he says it never was and never will be. And then the Talmud asks, oh, in that case, what's it doing in the Torah? And his answer is, Drosh v'kabel schar. We're supposed to study it. And by studying these hard passages, we get a reward. So, and what I'm going to do is we'll do that and see what the reward is. And then we'll see the opposing point of view is somebody named Rabbi Yonatan, who says, no, every passage of the Torah is real and legit. Even the hardest passages, this one too. And I once saw a person who got stoned to death at the instigation of his parents, and I sat on his grave. So this other view says that every passage of the Torah is there, and in the end, it's God's morality, not our morality. And that view is a minority view, and that's what we're going to see today. So before we get into it, and then what I'm going to do, finally, that the reward that we get is an insight from Rashi about this whole horrible thing. And I promised you in the teaser that the insight from Rashi connects with every one of our lives, every person on the screen. It's an important insight for all of us today. So that's the reward that we're going to get. Before we get into the passage, any thoughts, comments, questions by way of introduction before we take a look at Bain Sorer Umoreh? Any questions? And feel free to indicate in the chat. Joan Mail is hosting. Thank you, Joan. And if you have any questions, just put it in the chat or raise your hand. I'll do my best to see you. Okay, so look on page 2 of the handout. This is the terrifying passage. Then we'll see what the Talmud does, and then we'll interpret it in a way that Rashi interprets it. Page 2. If a man has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or mother and does not obey them, even after they discipline him, this father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the town at the public place of his community. They take him to Newton, to Beacon and Center Street, to Newton Center. They shall say to the elders of his town, this son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. Einenu shomea b'kolenu. He does not heed us. Hold on to that because you'll see what the Talmud does with it. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Thereupon the men of his town shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. Now, this text feels so remote and so far away from us that, what are we worrying about? But you see the news yesterday from Afghanistan, and they're interviewing, this is on the Today Show, bright young Afghan female teens, 15, 16, 17, who are studying and who are playing music. And they're worrying out loud that when the US forces leave and the Taliban takes over, they will be whipped in public for the sin of learning. They will be whipped in public for the sin of playing music. There can't be any music with the Taliban. So this is yesterday's news. This is about, in 2021, religious theocracy and religious fundamentalism. So this feels like that kind of a text, but this is even worse than whipping a female teen for playing music. This is stoning a son to death. Stoning, not whipping, and it's your kid. So this is just horrible. And the rabbis are trying to deal with, oh my God, what the heck is this doing in the Torah? So before we look at the Talmud and what the Talmud does with this, and by the way, I will just say sneak preview of coming attractions. This comes from Parshat Kitetse, which has a lot of laws. And this comes, Kitetse begins famously or infamously with 3 different vignettes. And this is the 3rd vignette. And again, sneak preview of coming attractions. Rashi is going to connect these 3 vignettes, which the Torah itself does not connect. Rashi is going to connect them. And that is going to be the key to the insight that we could take away in 2021. But before we do that, questions, thoughts, comments on our very challenging passage? Anyone? David Koppelman, thank you.
It kind of reminds me of the binding of Isaac. I mean, you read that portion, you say, what is God thinking? Telling Abraham to sacrifice his son, and then even more egregious, what is Abraham thinking that he following these instructions? What's wrong with him? Why doesn't he just say, this is immoral? You want me to kill my own son? I'm ignoring it. And this is kind of the same thing. The Torah is saying you shall stone your son because he's a drunkard, and people are capable of change. Even if he was persistent in his behavior, they still have some change. Do you execute somebody for past sins? It's just absurd to me.
Right. Now, in the case of the Abraham binding Isaac story, it ends happily enough in a way. At the end, God says, don't do it. Here, they actually stoned the son to death. Thereupon the men of the town shall stone him to death. And then you'll scare the hell out of everybody and sweep evil out from your midst. You know, if that Taliban start whipping, 15-year-old girls for the sin of playing the violin, that creates a terror tone. If 15-year-old girls, if the high school band is whipped in public by the religious authorities, that's going to chill the sound of music in the community. And that's what the Torah here. So it's just amazing. You look at this and say, oh my God, this is just horrible. Why this explains why people are like just turned off to religion. I get it. The rabbis of the Talmud get it. Scarily enough, religious fundamentalists, again, this is a live issue today. This kind of thing. So let's see what the Talmud does, because they also get the more obvious moral issue. So look on page 4. And this is famous because it's just so absurd. I mean, but it's absurd in the service of a good moral cause. What you're going to see is Rabbi Yehuda does not feel like he can say this is terrible, it's immoral, we're not going to abide by it. So what he does is he just creates a way to interpret it so that it could never be. So I'm on page 4 of the handout. This is the first column, first or second full paragraph. Rabbi Yehuda says, if a mother was not similar to his father in voice, in appearance, or in height, he cannot become a ben sorer or moreh. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to argue that the only way this provision can get triggered is if the mother and the father sound the same, look the same, have the same height. If you have two parents who sound different or look different or of different heights, then this whole provision could never apply, which is an absurd, it's kind of an absurd rule. It's saying it's inapplicable without declaring it unlawful or no longer good law. So the Gemara cites the biblical source for this ruling. What's the reason for these requirements? It is as scripture states, he does not hearken to our voice. Einenu shomea b'kolenu. He does not hear our voice. So this is Rabbi Yehuda's read of this. This teaches that the boy's parents must have similar voices. And from the fact that we require their voices to be similar, it follows that their appearance and height must also be similar, right? So it's just kind of this crazy ruling that since it says, Einenu shomea b'kolenu, he does not hear our voice. Oh, our voice must be the same voice, which isn't what it actually says. And because the voice has to be the same, the sound, the height has to be the same, the look has to be the same. And then if you go by that ruling, whose opinion is reflected in the Baraita? That is, this is very famous. There never was a ben sorer umoreh, nor will there ever be one in the future, right? Ben sorer umoreh lo haya, v'lo atid lihiyot. That is, it never happened and it never will happen. So then the Talmud asks, v'lama nichtav, why was it written? Drosh v'kabel sachar. So we write it, it's written, it's in the Torah, not to implement it, but to interpret it and wrestle with it and think about it. It's rich literature. It's evocative literature. It's literature that you read, and by the process of reading it, you'll come to insights about the human condition. You'll come to insights about your own life, but not, God forbid, to ever actually do this to any human being. So that is going to be the first view. There's another view which we'll get to. But let me just pause for questions. So what you have here is Rabbi Yehuda does not say this is obscene, this is terrible, we can't accept it. He doesn't do that. But what he does by interpreting it the way he does with the pretzel is that is the practical effect of what he does. He reads it out of the Torah without reading it out of the Torah. So thoughts, comments, questions. And I guess the question I have for you is, would you prefer if the Talmud just said, this is terrible, that it represents a different morality of a different time? It's not our morality, and therefore it's immoral and it's not applicable, and just be honest instead of this pretzely reading. Linda Leffert.
I'm not convinced by the pretzely reading explanation.
What do you
But,
mean you're not convinced?
well, I don't think it's logical. But my question is a deeper question that I don't have the answer to because I'm not a student, with sufficient background. But is it possible? Was it possible at the time, and is it possible today for people in authority to say essentially what you said was, this was then, and it wasn't a good thing, rather than trying to explain what at least to us seems inexplicable.
Right. So I think, Linda, this gets to the heart of the matter. Why does Rabbi, so of course you're right. I mean, there could be no dispute. However, there's 40 people on this call. There could be no dispute that the reading of Rabbi Yehuda is absurd. It's absurd. It's just a crazy, far-fetched, absurd read that, there's no legitimate, plausible way to argue that because it says, Einenu shomea b'kolenu, he doesn't hear our voice, that you then say, oh, our voice, therefore the voice must be exactly the same. Therefore, the height must be exactly the same. Therefore, the appearance must be exactly the same. I mean, that's just an absurd read. But the reason that he does it is so that this would never be applied in real life. He's trying, Rabbi Yehuda's far-fetched read is in the service of trying to save sons from getting stoned. So your question is, if I take your question, why doesn't he just say, what's going on? Why can't the Talmud just say, yuck, this is yuck? Or if not yuck, this is a different, that was then, this is now, this is morality from a different time, not our time. And I think that the answer to that question, Linda, is if Shavuot is in 2 weeks, Ma'amad Har Sinai is in 2 weeks, if you think that what that Sinai represents is God, creator of heaven and earth, comes down and gives us timeless instruction, that this is God talking, then it gets very hard to say God is immoral because it's God. By definition, Sinai giving Torah is a divine act from the creator of the universe. And if the creator of the universe can imagine a time when you stone somebody to death, the parents caused this, okay, that's what that's God talking. And that's what fundamentalists say to this day. But if you don't think Revelation is God talking, but it's humans doing our best to try to ascertain what God would want, but in the end, it's human beings, therefore it's time bound. It speaks to a particular time and it speaks to a particular place, and it was written in the ancient Near East, 2,200 years ago, and that's very different from today. Then you're able to say that was a morality of a different time and place. So Rabbi Yehuda is stuck in a paradigm where this is God talking. Most of us are not stuck in that paradigm. There may be some of us who feel like they want to be in that paradigm, but most of us feel like, this is the human community trying to figure out how to live a beautiful life, and our ideas change. Let's just call it what it is, a different morality for a different time. Did I answer your question, Linda?
No.
Oh, so then let me try again. What's your question?
No. I mean, well, maybe I don't. If I understand what you're saying, I think that if you're a fundamentalist and believes that not just the major principles, but every word cannot be changed, then there's no alternative.
Right.
Try to figure out a way, and even though it may sound ridiculous, this is the best you can do.
Right.
But is there any wiggle room in that for somebody who's not a fundamentalist, or if you're going to consider yourself Jewish, and certainly a Jewish rabbi, even if it's conservative or reformed, would you have to take the position that you have to figure out some wiggle room? There's just no way you can say, they were smart about a lot of things, most things, that this is kind of, if you can't draw the line at murdering, stoning your own child to death for being a drunkard, what line is there?
So Linda, here, let me give you some spiritual homework and the whole class some spiritual homework for Shavuot.
Thank you.
Okay. There's a book that's called, and in a way, this entire conversation boils down to this simple question and this simple answer. Who wrote the Bible? There's a book called Who Wrote the Bible? Okay. It's written by a guy named Richard Friedman, who's a Bible scholar in California. And Richard Friedman points out, this is, you might have heard about the documentary hypothesis. The documentary hypothesis is biblical scholarship. It originated in the university and in the places that where the heart of biblical criticism, or it's also called biblical criticism, biblical theory, biblical criticism. The place that embodied that and where it was just the most hospitable setting for it is called the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, right? The JTS, which ordained Rabbi Chill, JTS, which ordained Rabbi Warmflesh, JTS, which ordained me, okay? JTS loves biblical criticism. And what biblical criticism, but this book, Who Wrote the Bible, by Richard Friedman, Friedman. You can Amazon it and it will be home, in your house in a day or two. He looks at the Bible and especially the 5 books of Moses. And it's called the documentary hypothesis that JEPD, that there's different strands written by different people at different times, which were all kind of edited together in what became the 5 books of Moses. In other words, the answer to the question, who wrote the Bible, according to Richard Friedman, and according to the biblical, criticism, and according to what I was taught at the seminary, who wrote the Bible? Answer, human beings wrote the Bible. Human beings wrote the Bible. And then what follows from that is, now, how do we live a life that is full of, if human beings wrote the Bible, then why do I have to do it? And the whole project of the Jewish Theological Seminary is to be honest and to say, human beings wrote the Bible, JEPD. There's also a new JEPDH, the Holiness Code. There's these different strands of human beings. And it's still compelling because it makes for a beautiful, purposeful life. Right? If you ask at Yeshiva University, who wrote the Bible, they'll say God, not human beings. And if you say God, not human beings, then why do I have to do it is very simple. God said, and therefore halacha, halacha, halacha. If you say who wrote the Bible, human beings, then why do I have to do it? So that, I think in a way, this issue is prismatic of a very deep issue. If you say who wrote the Bible, God, then you run into this problem of stoning your son, then you're kind of forced to pretzel.
Okay.
If you say who wrote the Bible, human beings, which is, the way I was taught at the seminary, you say, okay, that was a different morality for a different time. Okay, but if you read who wrote the Bible, if you haven't read who wrote the Bible, read it. It's a very good read, and it's very, very clarifying. It will open your eyes, and the entire project of conservative Judaism is to answer the question, who wrote the Bible? Human beings, and it really matters, and it's really compelling, and we should do it, even though it's human beings who wrote the Bible. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Paul Kalis.
Yes, I read the book about 35 years ago, and it is stuck in my memory as one of the foundations of my Judaism. And I truly believe that the Torah was written by human beings as espoused by Friedman. I also believe that we have to have a way of amending the Torah, of excising certain material that does nothing but create problems for all of us. Not only for all of us, for all the world, because there are so many people believe it was written by God. So my attitude is we have to develop some kind of system. I don't want to say the word update, but to somewhat modify what's in the Torah, because it's not all truth.
Yeah. So Paul, all I can tell you is you're a very good Jew and a very traditional Jew, because in a real way, if you were to ask the most, Orthodox Jew on the planet, what was revealed at Sinai, they would not just say the 5 books of Moses. They would say the Torah should be, I'll use the language they would use, Torah shebichtav, the Torah shebal peh. The Torah shebichtav is the 5 books of Moses, and Torah shebal peh is the 66 tractates of the Talmud. All of that was revealed at Sinai. In other words, even that is a way of saying that we have to be able to interpret. We have to be able to update. I'll use your word. We have to be able to update. Okay. And there's a name for somebody who says, no, the only thing that was revealed was the 5 books of Moses. Those are called Karaites, right? Karaites are truly biblical literalists who rejected the Talmud, rejected the Mishnah. So in a way, we share the same kind of impulse, which is you have to be able to update. I'll use your word, Paul. And Rabbi Judah feels like that's what he's doing here. He's updating. Any other thoughts, comments, questions here? Then I want to look at the dissenting view, and then I want to look at Rashi, who has such a brilliant insight that I want to end our class with. Any other thoughts, comments, questions so far about Rabbi Yehuda? Okay, so now just take a look on page, we're on the same page, page 4 of the handout. And on the first full paragraph, the Baraita cites a dissenting view. Rabbi Jonathan said, I saw a Ben Sorer Umoreh, and I sat on his grave. Ani re'iti v'yashavti al kivro. I saw it, and I sat on his grave. In other words, Rabbi Yonatan says, don't read this out of the Torah. If it's written, Rabbi Yonatan is a biblical literalist. If it's in the Torah, it has to be true. If it's in the Torah, it has to be for a reason. And so he says, no pretzeling, no saying that you just read it to discuss it. No, this actually happened. So that's now, but you'll note it's a minority view. So 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Most people, for the strong majority view, is Rabbi Yehuda, that it's just theoretical, it never happened. But there is, around the table, a nice Jewish fundamentalist, a nice Jewish literalist who says, no, it happened. I saw it. I sat on the Ben Sorer Umoreh's grave. And that's how it's left. Both points of view are left to stand. And that's right. And then our work, if we're going to follow Rabbi Yehuda, is to try to understand what is the reward. Like, how is it that reading this horrible passage could give us a reward? And that's going to be our next piece of work. But before I do that, any thoughts, comments, questions so far? Dottie.
Many, many years ago, there was something called Selflove. When parents didn't make a difference about religion, what you were or believed in, when a child became, I guess the word is incorrigible, and they could not handle it anymore, the psychologists, the socialists mandated that it was proper, and the only way to punish or treat was tough love. Tough love meant that they literally threw them out of the house. They wanted no more. They were on drugs or they drank, and they could not. They tried everything they could, and it was called tough love. This went on, I don't know how. I had a friend whose friend went through it, and someone else. They locked the door. Now, is this justice as a parent? I think that I mean, they would not, certainly not going to stone them to death, but between morality, justice, and the right thing to do, it takes a lot of forethought. Now, I don't know if I'm beyond raising young children. These are kids that were in their teens. Do they do this today? And it's not self-love, abandoning not your belief, but abandoning everything that you believe in by abandoning your children. Whether they do this, I don't know anymore. But this was not well received, but it was being done. It's probably, 35, 40 years ago with kids in their late teens. They could not control them, but yet you couldn't put them in jail.
Well, we all know, Dottie, that within our own lifetimes, parenting standards have evolved and changed, fortunately. I mean, many of us probably grew up in homes where parents spanked their children. Now that is not done. Right now, if a parent spanks a child in public, the parent will get hauled off to the child welfare, and the kid could be taken away from them. I mean, that's how dramatically different parenting standards are today. Parents don't spank their kids today. It's not acceptable. And I think today, and actually there's some movies out about this, and we know about this, current thinking is that this approach, and there's a hint in the story of the child is Zolel v'Savea. He's a glutton and a drunkard. We would today think that this is a child who has an addiction problem. And by stoning him, the Torah is really, criminalizing an addiction problem. We see this today, obviously, as a very complex, very layered, medical, emotional, psychic challenge to be engaged, not as a criminal matter. So our standards are just very, very different. And perhaps that's part of the reward that Rabbi Yehuda wants us to get, is to clarify that addiction is not criminal. Addiction is a medical, biological, psychic challenge that needs to be treated, not punished. And we can clarify that by seeing what not to do. This is what not to do. What I want to do, though, is I want to now interpret this passage the way Rashi does. Okay, so if you look on page 1, we're going to see that there are 3 cases, and each of these is unlovely. I mean, just a trigger warning, each of these is unlovely. The first one is a case where the Israelite soldier conquers a subjected town. The Israelite soldier, has not been with a woman for a while. And the Israelite soldier sees a woman who is in the captive town, and he wants to have sex with her, right? Now, from time immemorial, including the present day, rape during war is a problem. And what the Torah does not do is say the Israelite soldier may not rape her and shall not have sex with her. Doesn't do that. Instead, it provides a mechanism where an Israelite soldier can lawfully, with the Torah's blessing, have sex with a captive woman, okay? This is very, very, very challenging material, but let's just take a look at it. That's going to be the first one. It's called Eshet Yafat Toar. I'm going to use colloquial English because it gets the point across. Eshet Yafat Toar means an attractive captive woman. This is a hot captive woman in colloquial English. What happens if you break through the town gates and you're conquering them, and there's a hot woman who is defenseless? What do? That's what this is describing. Eshet Yafat Toar. When you take the field against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and would take her to wife, you shall bring her into your house, and she shall trim her hair, pare her nails, and discard her captive's garb. She shall spend a month's time in your house, lamenting her father and mother. After that, you may come to her and possess her, and she shall be your wife. Then, should you no longer want her, you must release her outright. You must not sell her for money. Since you had your will of her, you must not enslave her. Okay? So in other words, an Israelite soldier sees a captive woman, and what he wants is to have sex with her right now. And the Torah says, no, you can't do it now. What you do is you take her to your house, then you have to make her less hot. You have to make her less attractive. She shaves her hair. She, cuts her fingernails. And then, and she takes off the captive clothing and puts on different clothing. And then you have to listen to her be utterly miserable that she has been kidnapped from her home. For 30 days, she's not as attractive. She's not wearing, she doesn't have the hair she had, doesn't have the nails she's had, and she's screaming and crying all day long because she's miserable being captive. And you hear that for 30 days. If at the end of 30 days, you want to have sex with her, go ahead. And then once that happens, she is considered your wife. You didn't just have sex with a captive woman. The woman that you had sex with is your wife. Now what happens if, having had your way, you're done with her? Then she's not your property. You can't sell her as a slave. You have to release her outright. That's vignette number 1. Okay, let's just talk about that. By the way, this is further evidence in my mind that God did not write the Torah, that humans wrote the Torah, because if God wrote the Torah, I can't imagine that God would have permitted such a thing. But what's a way to understand this? Like if you're trying to read this text sympathetically, I mean, it's horrible. It obviously provides a pathway to rape, is what it does. But if you were to try to read this sympathetically, what might you say to read something that is inherently unsympathetic? How could you read this somewhat sympathetically? Anyone want to make the case? Anyone want to be a good lawyer for the Torah and make the case that the Torah here, it's very challenging, but all in all, it's okay. David.
There is some compassion contained in that paragraph. You don't just simply follow your will and rape her right on the spot. You permit her to have a month to grieve the loss of her parents, to adjust to the situation. So there's some element of human compassion mingled in. So I suppose the Bible says, look, curb your lust and at least show some modicum of humanity. You're going to do it anyway, but at least do it in a humane fashion.
Linda?
I was just going to say one silly thing, which is that these days women pay a lot of money for long fake nails. That's just a difference in what's attractive. No, but on a bigger, greater level, I think it's something, that I agree, a person rather than, God would say, and a way of making something that's likely to happen less onerous. And also the end of it, which is the part that usually they would have been slaves. And at least, one thing that the woman will get out of it, that is at the end of it, if he's tired of her, she won't be a slave.
Right.
Can't sell her and she won't be a slave and she'll be a free person. So, given the situation, the likelihood of the soldier who sees her and wants her is going to go do that, ignore her for a month. I don't know. That's something else. But one thing is what is considered permitted. The other part of it, of course, is whether there's compliance.
So this is a very unlovely example of the Torah dealing with flawed human beings as we are and trying to, in a way that's plausible and doable, elevate our moral game. And what the Torah here is saying is that if you're a soldier and you haven't been with a woman in forever, and you come upon a woman and you can have your way with her. I mean, armies have been raping captive populations since time immemorial. And I mean, I suppose that the rationale here is if the Torah just says no, that is against human nature of soldiers. Soldiers do this kind of thing. And so what the Torah tries to do is limit it and reduce it and alter it and hope, right? And if the soldier does what the Torah requires, can't have her for 30 days and she has to become less beautiful, etc. But hopefully that will make his ardor go away and he won't do it. But the Torah here makes a very complex moral judgment that instead of legislating no, which is obviously the preferred moral response, that may not be doable or plausible. So it says, yes, under these circumstances, unlovely, but perhaps more likely to be implemented. In any event, let's keep going because we still have to get to the reward for this hard passage according to Rashi's language. So now here we have another vignette, and it's a seemingly different vignette. This first vignette is in a time of war. This next vignette is not a time of war. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the unloved one. When he wills his property to his sons, he may not treat as firstborn the son of the loved one in disregard of the son of the unloved one who is older. Instead, he must accept the firstborn, the son of the unloved one, and allot to him a double portion of all he possesses, since he is the first fruit of his vigor. The birthright is his due. So this is this whole business. You remember from the Jacob and Esau story that in ancient biblical Near East, the firstborn, the Bechorah, gets to inherit more. I mean, now we think that, if you have, 2 kids or 3 kids or 4 kids, everyone gets, co-equal. You got 2 kids, both children get 50%. You got 3 kids, both children get 33%. You got 4 kids, all 4 get 25%. But in that's a modern egalitarian sensibility. In the Bible, the Bechor got a double portion, right? Which is probably not great for family harmony and probably not great for siblings getting along, but remember the Jacob and Esau story, okay? So now the Torah throws up this crazy scenario that in a polygamous world, the guy has 2 women, 2 wives, and he loves one, and the other one is unloved. You're not allowed to favor the son of the woman that you love and disfavor the son of the woman that you don't love. Okay, so just hold on to that. And then the third is the one that we began with: if a man has the wayward and defiant son. So it seems like the Torah in Kitetse gives you 3 different vignettes. There's the wartime vignette of the soldier who rapes a captive woman but has to wait for 30 days. Then you have the man in civilian times who has 2 wives, one that he loves more, one that he doesn't love, and has sons from both of them. And then you have this third case, which is neither war, nor do you know in this third case that there's 2 wives. You just have parents and a son who has addiction issues and who's not listening. Okay. Now here's what Rashi does. Okay. And remember, I promised you in the teaser that we get to 2021, we get to you by the end of the class. Let's take a look at Rashi. Okay. I'm going to start out reading on page 5. When it says, you may take her as your wife. Okay, so I'm going to just read Rashi on this whole unlovely business. We're on page 5. The Torah speaks only in deference to the wicked inclination. For if the Holy One, blessed is he, would not permit her, he would live with her illicitly. Okay, so in other words, the Torah. So Rashi here says, listen, the Torah. Why is the Torah allowing the soldier to have sex with this woman? That's rape. The Torah should not do that. And Rashi answers, this is the Yetzer Hara of the soldier. This is the evil inclination. He's going to have sex with her. He's going to do it because he's a soldier, and that's what soldiers do. So this is not, this is the Torah dealing with human beings as they are and trying to curb. Okay, then it goes on to say, however, if he does marry her, he will ultimately hate her, as it is further said, if a man has, etc. So the second vignette is what happens after the first vignette happens. The soldier had a first wife back home. He then goes to war, and he has sex with this captive woman. Now he has the wife that he loves back home, and the captive woman is his unloved wife. And ultimately, he will father from her a wayward and rebellious son. The Bein Sorer Umoreh is the product of the soldier and the captive woman. All three, and then Rashi answers at the end, Lachach nismachu parashiyot halalu. This is why these chapters adjoin one another. Now we finally get to the reward. Dorosh v'kabel zachar. What is Rashi saying? That all of life is systems. This is systemic thinking, systems thinking. Nothing is just isolated. Nothing is just on its own. The ankle bone is connected to the hip bone, is connected to that bone, is connected to this one. Everything is interconnected. And whenever you see a problem, there is a larger ecosystem, a systems ecosystem from which the symptom occurs. So Rashi says, that the father presents, hey, this kid is not listening to me. And Rashi says, okay, let's try to understand what's the world from which this child came from. Oh, well, it turns out that he's the product of rape. It turns out that he's the product, his father was a soldier and his mother was a captive woman, and the father raped the mother and then brought her home and then brought him home, and he's growing up in a home where there's a preferred wife and their kids, and he is the son of the captive wife, and the father really doesn't love her and doesn't love him. Well, obviously the kid's going to go nuts. That's not a stable platform. And Rashi's whole point is that all of this stuff is interconnected. And whenever you see a symptom, the question is, what's the ecosystem from which this system comes? Thoughts, comments, questions? Paul Kalis.
If these sections were written by human beings, it is conceivable that the human beings at that time who wrote this had their own problem with women. So they may have had psychological problems to begin with, aside from the mores of the current time. So, and rather than use the word adapt, you use the word evolve. So we all have to evolve, and there's some parts of the Torah that should evolve because they are inexplicable.
Right. And this is, really why the conservative movement exists, to be able to evolve and also to see in this evolving civilization deep meaning and purpose. And that to struggle and to sanctify the struggle and to wrestle and to sanctify the wrestle, but ultimately to daven Shachris in the morning and Mincha in the afternoon and Mariv in the evening, because a life of practice fills your life with meaning. But we have a much more complicated task, because the truth is we can't just really say God said. When you say God said, there's a certain simplicity to that argument.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that simplicity. David.
I don't think you can say God said, because when you look at Rashi's explanation, it's the ultimate evil in a human being. I mean, first the soldier comes and rapes the woman. Now the Bible says you have to curb your appetite, wait 30 days before you rape her. Now she gets pregnant, has a child. The child is rebellious, and now you want to stone the child to death. So first you rape the mother, and then you take the child of the mother and stone him to death because he's wayward, he's incorrigible. It's kind of like the ultimate evil to descend on another human being, rape her and then kill her child. So how could a loving God espouse that point of view? It makes no sense.
Right, but now, what do you? Obviously, what do you think of Rabbi Judah? So what do we do with this? This is our inheritance. Is that we study it, and we study it with some distance and objectivity and some honesty and a critical attitude, and we try to deduce from it some learnings that actually speak to our life, such as, addiction is not a criminal act, it's a medical condition, such as symptoms don't just happen in a vacuum, symptoms happen in an ecosystem. Can we understand the ecosystem? And in that way, when we face this kind of a challenge, when we face a text like this or a series of texts like this, it's drosh v'kabel sachar. It's that when we discuss it and interpret it and argue with it and argue against it, that is actually Sinai. That is the revelation happening right now, because that's how it becomes Torah to us. That is, I think, what Rabbi Yehuda is saying in the Talmud. Drosh v'kabel sachar. Dixie.
I am wondering, after this discussion, I understand what you're talking about, that the argument, the discussion, etc., is a part of Torah. The essential question that remains for me is, where and what is God doing?
Right. So every person is going to have a different answer to that. Here's what my answer to that is. God is found in an energy to live our best life, in an energy to grow, in an energy to evolve, in an energy to deepen. And Mordechai Kaplan talked about God as the force that makes for redemption. In other words, not an old man with a white beard up in heaven like Zeus. God is very real, but not like Zeus. God is this force field, this energy that you can plug into, that in an effort to live your better life, to be a reflective practitioner of your own life. And so to me, the God that gives us Torah is very much an ongoing process, including every class that we ever have. What do we take away from this class? Sinai is not something that happened 3,200 years ago on some anonymous mountain in a desert in the ancient Near East. Sinai is every time we encounter Torah together, we think about it, and if we can extract a lesson from the conversation that will allow us to be wiser, more sympathetic, that will allow us to be stronger, more resilient, that's Sinai. And so to me, that is God. God is an ongoing energy field that allows us to be better and stronger. But every person will have their own. I guess my question back to you, Dixie, is what is your vision of where God fits into this whole picture?
I don't know.
That is a great answer. But I would invite you guys to get the book Who Wrote the Bible, and if you'd like to read it, we could read that next year when we pick up, if there's energy for that. If not, we don't have to. But if there is, Who Wrote the Bible is it's a way to make this whole idea of. By the way, if you ever you know, when you're back in the shul, if you have a Eitz Chaim Chumash at home, you know, there's the Torah part and the Haftarah part. And then in the back are all these essays that nobody ever reads. In the history of mankind, nobody's ever actually read one of these essays. But if you read one of these essays, the part that nobody ever reads, they're written by scholars and they talk exactly about biblical criticism. They talk about J, E, P, and D, and then they talk about how that's a pathway towards holiness and towards mitzvah and towards deeper connection. That's the essays that nobody ever reads. So what I'm actually talking about is basic seminary theology. So read who wrote the Bible, and let's pick it up. But I will tell you this: if you have to face rape during war, you know, 2 wives, and then the Ben Sorer Umoreh, and if you have to face, I think, David's very trenchant analysis that this poor woman, you know, is raped and then her son is stoned, and that is just awful. I would rather read it with a who wrote the Bible framework, that the answer to that question is humans, because I can say that was then, this is now. I'm going to learn from it. If you're a fundamentalist and you think this is really God and this is really morality for all times, that's a much tougher road to hoe. So with that, I wanted to call on Maddie Donoff.
Thank you, Rabbi, for another wonderful session this morning. I just wanted to let everyone know, I sent an email late last night that we will be passing on the next 2 weeks. Wes will be away next week, and the week after is Shavuos. And then we will return in 3 weeks on May 25th for our final session for the season. We usually end around the time of Shavuos. And we want you to all enjoy the services in 2 weeks and the studying that goes on during that time. And we look forward to our final culminating session on the 25th, when we can thank you, Rabbi, for this wonderful year of study, and also an opportunity for us to share some reflections on what this year has felt like as we study together. So we'll see you all in a few weeks.
Thank you, Maddie. Let me just ask you one quick question. How many, let me just see by a show of hands, for our last session, how many of you would like me to teach you something from who wrote the Bible, so you could just see what it looks like and the kinds of issues that he raises? Okay, so I'm gonna order that. I already have it. Order who wrote the Bible, and our last session will be, you know, follow from this conversation, and we'll take a look at that and what the implications are, not just for your mind, but for your heart and soul as well. So I will see you on May 25th. Lots of love, guys. Chag Sameach.